We all love Cadillac Williams, but what he's done as a coach over the last 12 months, it's pretty special.
Freezing temperatures are likely for several hours inland and a few hours closer to the coast.
Yes.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zac Blackerby. Thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. Joining us for a little Ferg Friday action, Justin Ferguson of the Auburn Observer, putting content out directly into your email inbox pretty much every single morning. And one thing, Ferg, that you put up earlier this week in response to Auburn landing four-star running back Phat Burnette, Jamarian Burnette, whatever you want to call him, but giving a nod to Caddy, giving a nod to Carnell Williams because he goes out and gets his guy again.
Yeah, and this has been one of the more impressive coaching jobs I think we've seen from a position coach at Auburn in a while, because Cadillac Williams, not only did he do all the great stuff he did as an interim in the month of November, but he stays on board and then just picks up right where he left off. And you've got a position group. I think Auburn's running backs are going to be the strength of their offense. Even without Tank Bigbsy, it's a really good room. Jarquez Hunter, Damari Alston, you're going to add Jeremiah Cobb into it. Brian Battie is going to bring you a different dimension. Then you go and get Phat Burnette, and this is going to be a really strong running back room for years to come, because Auburn at running back is doing something that I think a lot of schools want to do with their quarterbacks, is like get a great one each year and just keep funneling them through. Now, Cadillac's thought about wanting to get two guys this year in the running back room. That would be huge, obviously, take it to the next level. But the stat I found that was interesting is since Cadillac Williams came on board for Auburn, he has had a blue-chip running back signed in 4 out of 5 years. There's only 12 teams in the country that have done 4 in the last 5. There's only 4 that have done it in 5 out of 5. And the only thing keeping Auburn from being in that 5 out of 5 room is that Jarquez Hunter was very much underrated. And obviously Auburn was going through a big coaching change during the COVID year, during all the recruiting stuff as well. So, I mean, you could make the argument that, Cadillac Williams is a top 5 running back recruiter in college football. And then the numbers speak for themselves when it comes to the production.
The irony of Jarquez Hunter being the one that's statistically holding him back is hilarious, because I think we all look at Jarquez Hunter and he's like, he may be the best one, after this season. He's going to be set up for such a prime situation. For yesterday, Daryl and I, we each shared our 5 winners so far of spring.
Mm-hmm.
And one of mine was Jarquez Hunter, not because anything Jarquez Hunter has done, but because he's getting the benefit behind this newly revamped offensive line. I mean, he could have a huge 2023.
You look at Jarquez Hunter, I don't expect the yards per carry to be the same amount if he is the lead back. But keep in mind, last season, he had the best yards per carry of any Auburn running back with at least 100 touches in a season. You got to go all the way back to Brent Fullwood the last time you had somebody, and that was back in the 80s for Auburn. So, this is an elite type of production that we've seen from him. And it's a group that I think should be really, really good. Damari Alston, I think, is going to be a guy that gives you good, touches, maybe a handful of them a game. Brian Battie, not only is he going to give you a ton, I think, in the kick return game, but he can be so, the versatility with him is going to be pretty big. And then you get Jeremiah Cobb coming in the summer, and all that Jeremiah Cobb did in high school was just run for 1 billion yards at Montgomery Catholic. And so you got Phat Burnette coming in as well, if he signs, next season. And it's just a steady flow. Hunter was the only guy who wasn't a blue chip out of that group, but they thought they had a diamond in the rough with him. And sure enough, he's proven that the first 2 seasons of his career. Yeah,
so they've nailed it. They've nailed it. So do you think all 4 of these guys are going to be happy? Jarquez, Damari, Battie, and then obviously with Cobb coming in, are all 4 of them going to be happy going into 2023? Because I still think they brought Battie in to fill a role, right? And I don't know if we're exactly positive what that role is. I think he's definitely going to be relevant in the return game. We'll see how relevant he is as a running back. I think he's going to be, but if he's the second back or even he's the third, like who's the other one, right? Like, is it Damari? Do they redshirt Cobb? He seems too good to redshirt. Like, how they handle that situation is going to be interesting. And I don't know how all four of them could be happy in theory.
I think you want to have at least three guys who can be a quote unquote, like between the tackles downhill, your guy at running back that's good in case anybody gets hurt. That's good in keeping everybody fresh. I mean, you go back to some of the best running attacks that Auburn's had over the last decade or so.
Right.
You see a lot of those kind of not a super, like, it's not like Georgia or Alabama those years where they had like four guys all average 7 carries a game, but you have that rotation. And I do think Batty is one of those guys that is going to give you just a different dimension because his speed is so good and he's not he can run between the tackles better. I think people will give him credit for just because of his size, but he is not a guy that you're going to say, hey, you're going to be our 20 carry a guy. No, you're going to probably do a lot of different things and get you out in space and try to sling it around. But I think you can easily come up with a system where these guys are all, kind of happy and plugged in. I think you go back to last season, you had Tank Bigbsy, you had Jarquez Hunter, but you still found a way to get Damari Alston the ball in his hand some. So, I mean, I think it is definitely possible, especially in an offense that is going to want to play fast and spread the wealth. You're going to be able to kind of move some things around, I think, a little bit better.
One dynamic of Bad T that I thought was interesting is I was talking to some of the defensive players after last week's scrimmage, and the defensive line and linebackers at times were getting frustrated because Bad T disappears behind the offensive line.
Yeah.
And it's hard to tackle somebody that you can't see. And then by the time you see him, if he's outside of you, like, you're not going to catch him. And so if you're used to having to tackle Jarquez and tackle Damari and tackle Cobb, then a change of pace guy comes in.
Yeah.
I mean, as an Auburn person, it's hard not to have flashbacks back to Corey Grant and Ontario McCaleb, right? I mean, it's hard not to. I don't think he's going to have that type of speed that those guys had. But just as far as changing the pace, and as a defensive guy, and I say this all the time, college athletes, you want them to make decisions and think over and over and over again pre-snap. And when you do that, when you change your personnel out, there's an extra thing you've got to pay attention to. I think over the course of 60 minutes, it wears you down.
Yeah, and Betsy is a guy that played on a bad team last year at South Florida, but you go back and look, he had a fantastic game against Florida. He's got some big numbers against some teams that aren't quote unquote bad teams. It's not him and Rivaldo Fairweather are kind of those two guys where you bring them in and you see, okay, can they make that step up? You look at their numbers last season, like, yeah, you can definitely see where they can make it. And they both bring a new dynamic, a new dimension to their respective rooms. Like, Auburn's running back room was pretty good and was going to be pretty good, but you get something different with Brian Batty. Same thing with the tight end room. A lot of experience, a lot of depth. Rivaldo Fairweather just gives you an added dimension, and that's why you work the transfer portal.
Sure. Right. Okay, let's talk about another newcomer, Keldric Faulk, the lone 5-star in this year's recruiting class. How productive can he be, and how big of a market share will he have of the snaps at the jack linebacker position? We tell you coming up right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Obviously, the Final Four is here, and you want to get in on the action, and there's no reason not to, because right now FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Bet $1,000, guys. There's nothing to lose here. You get $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up today. Once again, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Keldric Faulk does not look like a freshman, an early enrollee freshman. Nope. That is a special young man who Auburn found and got the flip from Florida State, and he's got a chance, like Kayan Lee, I think, to start as a true freshman and be an incredible player to start off this Hugh Freeze era at Auburn.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what you needed. When you lose Derek Hall and you lose Eku Leota and you lose Colby Wooden, Auburn's pass rush is.
Let's throw Marcus Bragg in there too.
Marcus Bragg,
impressed with him last year.
Obviously, Marcus Bragg. I mean, you're having to kind of rebuild your pass rush from scratch, and it's going to be tough for Auburn to do that. But at least they have a guy like Keldric Faulk that I think is a very impressive player. Last week, I remember watching the Jacks on, and I've said it a couple of times, written it a couple of times. They're on the sleds, and he hits that thing, and it just turns sideways. It just, and he's huge, like you said. This is a guy who's 6'6", 275. That's a monster, and he's supposed to still be in high school right now. But Keldric Faulk, I think, when you hear guys like Jeffrey Ambaugh say, I don't remember him losing a one-on-one this year. When you hear Jeremy Garrett's like, dude, that guy's going to be special. Y'all just wait. It's a lot of talent and a lot of things that jump off the page. But you got to keep in mind, pass rushing for a true freshman, usually in college football, it takes you a little while to get going. It's hard to be Will Anderson right off the bat. So it's going to be interesting to see. I went back and looked at it in the newsletter we wrote this week. Since 1996, which is as far back as we can go with really detailed stats from Auburn, only 5 freshmen have ever recorded at least 4 sacks in their first seasons. 3 of those guys were redshirt dudes. The only 2 true freshmen were Leonardo Carson and then Carl Lawson. Okay, so if you look at Carl Lawson, 5-star, one of the best guys at his position. You look at the SEC last season. You had Harold Perkins and Carnell Williams both get more than 4 sacks in the SEC as freshmen. Those are the only 2 guys that got more than 4 sacks. What did both those guys have in common? They were top 10 players in the country coming out of high school. So, Dallas Turner was this way 2 years ago for Alabama. Usually, if you say, "Oh, this guy comes in and is immediately just a monster in pass rush," it's usually somebody who was supposed to be a really, really highly rated guy. Now, Keldric Faulk is near that area, not quite that, consensus all the way across the board 5-star those other guys were, but he does have kind of an edge early on in talent. It's just, I want Auburn fans to get excited about Keldric Faulk. He's going to be a good player. There's a lot of excitement around him. However, don't expect this dude to come in and just start tearing people apart in the sacks right off the bat. It's really hard for freshmen to do that right away in college football.
But it's also hard for freshmen to get a massive opportunity as well.
Very good point. Yeah.
And so, he's coming into a perfect situation for him to see the field quickly, because it's even if he's not the starter and it's Elijah McAllister, those are really the only 2 Jacks people are talking about, which kind of makes you wonder, how much, is Dylan Brooks going to be able to really solidly crack the rotation? I'm curious to see how all that fits together. But I think he will have more opportunities than most freshmen will, just because of the nature of the roster right now.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think those guys that I talked about, like Perkins and Williams earlier, and obviously Carl Lawson, those guys were out on the field because they had those opportunities, because they were so good. And I think Faulk is going to have that kind of combination of talent and opportunity ahead of him. I also think that, Auburn is, if anybody who is a legit, well-regarded pass rusher goes into the portal in May, I think Auburn's going to go after him. There's a few positions where it's just I think they're going to just move heaven and earth to try to get somebody there. Because even if you like Faulk, and even if you can get some stuff from Elijah McAllister and some of those guys, like Brent Williams has had a good spring where you can just get reps, you can get opportunities for those guys. You still would love to have an established, or at least somebody who's done it before. But man, you get him for at least 3 years, Auburn fans, and he looks the part. He looks the part early on, because there have only been a handful. I was talking to somebody about this the other day. There's only ever been a handful of true freshmen I think I've ever seen at Auburn where physically when they were on the field, I was like, okay, that's different. And Braden Smith is always one of my big go-tos. Kyle Davis for a wide receiver was like that.
Marlon.
Marlon. Yeah, Marlon and Derek were just like, oh, good Lord. But Keldric's the first one kind of in a while, I think, where I've just looked at it as a true freshman. You're like, okay, physically, it looks like you've been doing this for a long time, but you haven't, and that should give you a head start.
When it comes to, because Hugh Freeze said it, I think it was 2 weeks ago, Ferg, where he was asked about the Jack position. He's like, yeah, we're not done recruiting it. We need more dudes.
Yeah.
What do you think that sales pitch looks like? Because you can't go and get another Elijah McAllister, a guy that has 1 year left of eligibility. And then you can't even pitch a future starting spot because Keldric's here for 3 years. So what do you think that looks like? Do you say like, hey, you're going to be a really important rotational piece? And if you're in the portal, like, is that intriguing to you?
I think if you're a guy who's had a handful of sacks the last few years and you've been an established guy, you can definitely walk in and get this job. Like here's the thing is that I don't want to. This is going to sound like a slam, and it's not. I don't want to, but look at Elijah McAllister's stats at Vanderbilt. This is a dude who just only had a handful of tackles for loss and sacks. Now, I'm not saying he's not going to have an impact, but he's also not this guy where it's like, he's got all this. Like he reminds me a lot of a guy you just mentioned earlier, Marcus Bragg, a dude who will come in and fill a role for you, get in your rotation, and maybe give you some good plays.
Sure,
and get some good roles. But if anybody jumps into the transfer portal who is an outside linebacker, stand-up defensive end type, and has had some really good numbers at the Group of 5 level or anywhere that's not the SEC unless they're a grad transfer, right. You can just sit here and say, hey, man, we need you. Eku Leota, I think it would be a great example. If you could find an Eku Leota in the portal right now.
Oh, you would take that in a heartbeat.
You would do that and say, hey, you're going to get as many opportunities as you can. Because right now your options are either young and very inexperienced or a guy like McAllister who is going to provide you leadership, provide you a really good role. But he's also not a guy who's gotten 5, 6, 7 sacks a year in his career. Mm-hmm. That's just not what he's done to this point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for going for upside, but like
you got to have dudes for right now.
You literally just need bodies to play the position. And yeah, I mean. McAllister is that to some extent, but he does have 1,000 snaps, at Vandy, and I think his floor is fine. I don't think his ceiling is anywhere near what Keldric's is, but he's a player that I think you feel comfortable playing. Yeah, and can Auburn go and get 2 more of those guys? We'll see if those guys are available. The talking point of this week has been the wide receivers, and they're here in the doubters. And we'll see how they respond. Ferg, we'll talk about that in just a moment right here on Locked On Auburn. The Built March Madness bracket is here. We know you have a favorite Built Bar or Built Puff, and now's your time to make it count. Go to BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote for your favorites. You can do it every day of March, so I guess we're about out of time. But when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you'll be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. And one Locked On fan will win a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to their door. So once again, head over to BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote on the action. So we all know the story up to this point, Ferg. Heather Dinich, national ESPN writer covering college football, started her college tour, going to different practices. Looks like Auburn was her first stop. She put out a tweet being critical of the wide receivers, but like we said before we clicked record, it's the same stuff that Hugh Freeze and the coaching staff has been saying. It just felt a little different, but she said the same stuff that Hugh Freeze was saying. And hey, maybe it was something that she was just reiterating that Coach Freeze told her directly. I don't think that would be a shock at all. But man, it really seems like those receivers heard it, and I mean they're still tweeting about it 42 hours after the fact.
Yeah, it's motivation for sure. I think above all else, and this is a group that let's go back to the actual tweet that Heather Dinich said, because I think some people may be taking it out of proportion. Or so her tweet says, "Auburn football fans, you may need some patience with your wide receivers." You know who I've heard talk about Auburn needing patience with their wide receivers right now? The coaching staff, because right now, and here's the thing, it's not that people are saying, oh, these dudes don't have talent, oh, these dudes don't have a chance or anything like that. It's like they're learning everything now. This is an offense that is brand new to them, and you got to come back to the fact that, like, yeah, any Auburn fan who looks at this roster realistically could sit here and say, yeah, the wide receiver is going to need some work. 0 Auburn receivers finished in the top 50 in the SEC in catches last year.
That's wild.
Your leader in yards, Javarius Johnson, was outside the top 25 in that area. So
and Tank led in receptions, right?
Right. And so you had Tank in receptions. You also had John Samuel Shaker get a lot of catches. But this is a new offense. This is an offense that's going to go 4 wide a lot, and they're going to want to spread it and flood it. That is going to be something for Auburn this year. Is just it comes with reps. Like these guys, don't know everything that they're doing right now, and they're learning and they're adapting and they're doing all this stuff. I think it's going to be better for them. Right. I mean, talking to Camden Brown on Wednesday, he was like, look, I had never been in a huddle until last year. And now we're back to not playing this no huddle stuff again. And I think it's better for my game. It's just, you gotta rep it. This is what spring practice is for. And so, yeah, right now it doesn't look great for the wide receivers. They're not just immediately going, oh man, they're popping off the page. But a couple things. One, they're dealing with injuries, a lot of hamstrings, a lot of ankles, a lot of stuff like that. And then number two, your quarterback battle isn't necessarily just firing on all cylinders at the moment. Those guys are learning. Those guys are developing. Yeah. There's a lot of competition there. And so, yeah, it doesn't look awesome with the passing game at the moment. But that's why you have patience. This is what spring practice is for. This is what the summer's for. This is what fall camp is for. That is a group that I think is going to – I mean, there's talent. There's real deal talent in that group. They just need some time to develop. And I think – it's going to take a while, and I think we're going to even get into the season and say, okay, where are we going to see? Just keep making those kind of steps. It's going to be a process. This is when you talk about rebuilding the Auburn football program under Hugh Freeze, the passing game, I think, is priority number one. That and recruiting, I think, are the two ones where you can say you got to change a lot from what you just saw the last couple of years. But again, not a ton of production coming back. And also on top of that, this is a team that had back-to-back losing seasons. Like, it's supposed to be, a situation where you're building back.
Yeah, no, I think all that's well said. Ferg, I'm going to put you on the spot here.
All right.
If, let's say they roll out a 3 wide receiver set.
Sure.
Who are the starting receivers?
Camden Brown, Coy Moore, Javarius Johnson.
Coy's on the outside. Javarius at the slot.
I would say Coy. You're seeing Coy as a smaller of the outside receivers, like the old flanker spot. They told us it was interesting. Camden Brown was saying the new positioning system at wide receiver. Under Gus, you had the 9s and the 2s and the 3s and the 5s. They went to the traditional, X and Z and Y and all that. This year it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's left to right.
I love that.
One on the outside, 2 and 3 in the middle, 4 on the outside. So I would say that would probably be where I would go. Then there's some versatility in there. If you go 4 wide, I think that's where things get interesting, because it's like, do you kick a guy like Coy Moore on the outside and put Nick Martiner on the outside? Do you have another?
That's what we've seen, right? In the short amount of – I mean, Martiner has been consistently the other big guy opposite Cam Brown.
Yeah, and
I guess that would be the 4, because he's always on the far right side.
Right, and I think that's probably a good mix there. But I think Camden Brown is the guy to watch the most at wide receiver this year. I think the stock continues to go up with him. He's the guy everybody's talking about so highly. Sure. Javarius Johnson brings a ton back as your lead producer, and then Coy Moore as well. I mean, I think those guys, it's the leadership until we start seeing, guys like Landon King and Tavares Dawson and Jay Fair and Amari Kelly and those guys, like, take those big steps forward. I think you lean on your experience, and Nick Martiner plays into that as well as the transfer, and also lean on a guy in Camden Brown that it's just like you can't go anywhere and talk with anybody at wide receiver without mentioning just how good that dude looks.
Right. Ferg, how can people check out everything that's going on with the Auburn Observer?
AuburnObserver.com. Sign up there. It is just $40 for your first year, so you're going to get all of football season, all of next basketball season for just $40. It's the cheapest deal that we've given, and we're going to do that all the way until the end of 8-day weekend, so you got plenty of time to sign up. But yeah, I mean, we've got a ton of stuff on there right now. What we talked about today, a lot of newsletters on that. Got a podcast out today, got a mailbag out today, and then we'll be rolling. It's kind of hard to believe that next week we're going to be talking about like 8A and the end of spring practices.
I know it.
So it's a ton of stuff going on right now. AuburnObserver.com. You're going to want to sign up here, because we're putting out something pretty much every weekday at 6 a.m. Central Time.
It's worth it. And I'm paying full price. So yeah, jump on that that special deal. You can find all my written work at auburndaily.com, and we will see you on Monday. This has been Locked On Auburn.